All right. Hello again, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us virtually today. My name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so excited to introduce you to Atmosphere's first author event of 2023. Today, we will be celebrating new nonfiction from Atmosphere, both biography and memoir. We'll be hearing from Charles Ota Heller, reading from Cowboy from Prague, An Immigrant's Pursuit of the American Dream, which was released on July 19th, 2022. John A. Lipman, reading from Alfred B. DelBello, His Life and Times, which was released September 15th, 2022. And Kristin Rohman Rehkamp, reading from Finding Us, a mother's memoir of braving mental illness with her young daughter, which was released October 15th, 2022. All three authors' books can be purchased from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, you can order the books on Atmosphere Press's website at www.atmospherepress.com/books. And please see the links in the chat. At the end of the event, we will have time for your questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for any or all of our authors, go ahead and type that in the chat and I will make sure it gets asked. And during the reading itself, please stay muted to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, definitely feel free to use the chat for any praise and comments. And one last note, we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Charlie, John, and Kristin this afternoon. Let's start off with our first reader, who is Charles Ota Heller. Charles was born in Prague and came to the United States at 13, following a boyhood as a hidden child during Nazi occupation, and later a harrowing escape from Czechoslovakia's communist regime. Today, he is a writer, having published the award-winning Prague, My Long Journey Home, a lighthearted memoir called Name Droppings, Close Encounters with the Famous and Near Famous, and Ready, Fire, Aim, An Immigrant's Tales of Entrepreneurial Terror. He earned 3 engineering degrees, BS and MS from Oklahoma State University, and PhD from the Catholic University of America. He was recipient of Maryland's Entrepreneur of the Year Award, OSU's Lohman Medal, and CUA's Alumni Achievement Award. He has also been a high-tech entrepreneur and venture capitalist. In 2015, he was inducted into the Oklahoma State University Engineering Hall of Fame. He now lives in Annapolis, Maryland with his wife, Sue, and can be found at www.charlesoheller.com. Charlie's latest memoir, Cowboy from Prague, is an inspiring account of a refugee who boarded a ship toward hope, the United States, where he began a pursuit of the American dream. Despite struggles with anti-immigrant prejudice and the discovery that America is not the perfect nation he had imagined, Charlie succeeds beyond even his own dreams. And with that, Charlie, take it away.
Thank you very much, Hala. And thank you all for being here. I see so many of my friends on my screens. Thank you. I'm going to read the first chapter, and then I'm going to skip over to a vignette from the back of the book. Chapter 1, Escape. We're dead. 2 soldiers emerged from the darkness and pointed their rifles at us. Were they Nazi SS murderers rumored to be hiding near the border less than 3 years after the end of the war? Or were they communist border guards under orders to stop escaping enemies of the state like us? In either case, I was certain that I would not live to see my 13th birthday. The previous day, I had been worried, but not frightened, when my father explained why we had left Prague in a hurry and driven a couple of hours toward the western border. After all, Papa had fought with the Czechoslovak Brigade of the British Army and defeated the Germans. He would never let harm come to Mother and me. We're leaving the country, my father had told me in the car. The communists have taken away our factory and they will harm us in other ways if we stay. So we're going to start a new life, hopefully in America. But first you'll have to be brave because we're going to cross the border tomorrow night, and it's going to be dangerous. The border guards may try to shoot us. After spending the night in a hotel, the next day, Saturday, March 13th, 1948, we got back in the car and rode out into the countryside. There, with no one in sight, Papa drove the Ford into a field. We took out our baggage, abandoned the car, and walked back to a small village we had passed. Mother went to a bus stop while Papa and I continued to the other side of town. We went into a tavern and had a snack. My father whispered to me that we were taking separate buses in order not to arouse suspicion. An hour or so later, he and I went back to the stop and caught the next bus to the town of Ush, the country's westernmost large town. We met Mother in Ush and walked to the railroad station. Papa bought third-class tickets to Rosbach, a village near the German border. The train, belching white smoke from the stack of the coal-fired locomotive, arrived a few minutes later, and we rode it without incident to Rosbach. The village station was tiny, and there was no one in sight. But a few minutes later, a horse-drawn wagon pulled up near the tracks. "Mr. Heller?" asked the driver. "Come with me." We piled our belongings into the wagon and hopped in behind the driver. He cracked his whip and the two horses began to trot out of town. We rode for some time until we came upon a farm at the edge of a thick forest. The farmer motioned us inside. "Make yourselves comfortable," he said. "You'll stay here till midnight." I noticed that he never introduced himself, nor did we ever hear the name of his wife who served us dinner. Had I realized that this would be our last decent meal for many months, I would have savored it more. I dozed off in a chair while my parents sat quietly and spoke to one another only occasionally. A grandfather clock in the corner seemed to be in slow motion as its little hand crawled toward 12. Finally, the clock announced that it was midnight. "Get your things and let's go," we were ordered. Sleepily, I put on my jacket and shoes and headed out the door. Just as I was about to exit the house, I heard my father scream at the farmer, "Where's our suitcase?" It turned out that the farmer had stolen one of our bags while we waited in the living room. He proclaimed his innocence, but how else would 1/5 of our worldly possessions, as we headed for exile, disappear inside his house? There was nothing my parents could do but go on, now considerably poorer than we had been when we arrived. Outside, we were greeted by a spectacular starry but moonless sky. The farmer motioned for us to follow him, with Mother carrying one suitcase and Papa having two bags strapped together, one in the front and the other in the back. I carried a bundle of blankets, which I would find out later contained valuable jewelry that would constitute the majority of our assets as immigrants. We walked across a field to the edge of the forest. There, the farmer stopped and pointed into the woods. "Walk for about 3 hours in that direction, and if you're lucky and the border guards don't shoot you, you'll run into American soldiers. Good luck." With that, he turned and sauntered off to the farmhouse. We began walking in the direction he had indicated, avoiding footpaths in order not to be detected. It was dark and scary in the woods, and I imagined being attacked by wild animals or worse, by German SS killers who were rumored to be hiding in the forest. My bundle was getting heavier with each step, and I stopped every few minutes to rest. Occasionally, Papa referred to his compass in order to make sure we were heading west. He urged me to keep up with him. I kept tripping over roots, stumbling and falling, all the time frightened that I would give us away by making too much noise. I expected to hear gunshots at any moment, and my heart was beating wildly. The night was cold, but I was sweating profusely. I was totally exhausted when, after 3 hours, we reached the end of the forest. Suddenly, out of the darkness stepped two men in uniform, shining flashlights into our eyes and aiming their rifles at us. We stopped in our tracks as they approached, calling out in a strange language. "We're dead," I thought as I gripped Mother's hand. I looked at Papa and found it difficult to believe that he appeared so calm. The soldiers came closer. Papa spoke to them in the same strange language. Finally, he turned to us and smiled. "These are American soldiers," he announced. "We're in the U.S. zone of Germany. we're free. So that's the end of chapter 1, and I will now just skip to the back of the book and read a portion of the author's note, which ends the book. People who are lucky enough to have never been forced to leave their countries have no idea of the courage, risk-taking, and pain of those who leave behind family, friends, material possessions, language, and comfort of home. No one abandons his or her native country on a whim. Whether escaping tyranny, murderous gangs, poverty, or religious persecution, all refugees have one thing in common: seeking a better life. This was their driving force when my parents decided that we would escape our communist oppressors and start from nothing in America. Although I had written much of the material previously, I attribute the idea for Cowboy from Prague and Immigrant's pursuit of the American dream to the events leading up to the presidential election of 2016, the period during which millions of Americans came out of the proverbial woodwork to demonize immigrants, to deny refugees access to this country, and to tell immigrants who grew up here to leave. When I woke up on Wednesday, November 9th, I thought of a morning some 67 years before, when the beautiful Lady Liberty seemed to step forward out of the morning mist to welcome us to America. Now I wonder if the lady had tears streaming down her face because the immigrant haters had won. It was at that moment that I decided that through my own story, I needed to shout out that we immigrants are not a burden. We pay more in taxes than we ever claim in benefits. We start new companies and thus create jobs for others. We enlarge the labor force and increase consumer demand. Those among us who are less educated and less skilled tend to work in jobs that natives don't want to take on. I wrote Cowboy from Prague in support of enlightened Americans, those who not only understand the economic benefits of immigration, but who believe that taking in human beings in distress is what this country has always done, whose voices will drown out the insults and bravado of the haters. This is the America about which I dreamed as a 12-year-old in a refugee camp. That is the nation which allowed me to pursue and realize the American dream. That is the America about which I decided to write. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm so glad you read that portion from the author's note, because as you were reading the first excerpt, that's exactly what I was thinking about. Is people think this is, it's such a distant thing, and thank you so much for sharing with us, an account of this kind of experience, and kind of cluing us into that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So reading next is John A. Lipman. John, a writer and public policy consultant, is the author of Alfred B. DelBello, His Life and Times. His inspiration for the biography came from his mother, who worked for DelBello for more than a decade. His writing has appeared in publications such as The Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, and Philadelphia Inquirer. Lipman served as the chief planner and deputy director of the Cape Cod Commission, an environmental agency of Barnstable County. He also served for 3 years under Massachusetts Governors Weld and Cellucci as the director of growth planning for the Massachusetts Executive Office of Environmental Affairs. He has a BA from Bates College, an MBA from Boston University, and a Master of Public Policy from the University of Maryland. His communications firm, Right Makes Might, is located in Orleans, Massachusetts. In his debut biography, John records the challenges and triumphs of the Democratic Party politician, Alfred B. DelBello. In an age in which climate change, healthcare, and social injustice are key issues, and bipartisanship and endangered species, DelBello remains a not-so-distant mirror of how to work across party lines to ensure quality of life for all Americans. John, the mic is all yours.
Thank you very much, Ayla. I had to switch over to my iPhone, so I hope the sound is good, because Cape Cod is like the third world of the internet, and our internet went out just as Charlie began. So So here we go. This should take just a little under 14 minutes. The first excerpt I'm going to read describes Al DelBello's first mayoral term in Yonkers, New York, in which he revolutionized government and took on the very difficult task, and sometimes dangerous task, of ridding the city of corruption and influence by organized crime. Years before his 1969 election, the Yonkers City Council had obediently acquiesced to the area's private carting services for commercial garbage pickups. The trash trucks were run by one of the region's most powerful organized crime syndicates. The mob had cornered the market on commercial collections and assumed exclusive control of the city's only public incinerator. Over time, it had muscled the city to drive down tipping fees, and which were based on the weight of the waste to be disposed of, flooding the facility with its own trash and effectively barring entry to city trash trucks. Public carters had to lumber more than 20 miles to the Croton Point landfill to dump residential refuse at great expense to taxpayers, while private crime-controlled carriers had the luxury of local disposal at rock-bottom rates. The garbage czar of Yonkers, and indeed the entire county, was Nicholas Cockeyed Nick Retenny, who owned more than 90% of the city's private collection business. With a lengthy arrest record, but only one conviction dating back 40 years, Retenny had spent a quarter century building a lucrative Westchester trash empire, using guile, insider deals, and payola as his primary means of investment. He housed himself and his two daughters on a 12-acre Yonkers estate, complete with a driving range, putting green, and 3 stately homes, as well as a 3-bedroom playhouse more stylish than dwellings of many hardworking Yonkers natives. Going up against Retenny was a tough task for anyone, much less the city's first Italian-American mayor, whose surname fed the cultural bias of the time, that he himself was associated with the mob. At the end of the 1960s, Yonkers, and indeed much of America, was a nation of distinct cultures, ethnic neighborhoods, and prejudices. Al and his wife Dee remember hosting a reception at their home while he was mayor. A small group of up-county party leaders exploring his ambitions for county executive was apprehensive of how a Yonkers Italian would fare as a county-wide candidate on the driving ranges and clay courts of Bedford and Scarsdale. Linen napkins, a beehive, blue-eyed socialite chirped in saccharine disdain at the buffet table, feigning pleasant surprise at the absence of chrome-plated paper napkin dispensers typical of Italian pizza parlors. It was a white glove indignity that irked the young mayor. But DelBello's clash with Retenny didn't spring from any need to defend his heritage or prove his integrity. It was simply the right thing to do. Garbage was the king of criminal enterprises in Yonkers, but only one part of a far-reaching pattern of endemic corruption. The winter before DelBello's election, when the deeply frustrated 10th Ward councilman started his campaign for mayor, the region had endured an epic blizzard. The city's response was one of devastating mismanagement and incompetence. A dearth of snowplows and an ersatz management plan had left the city woefully unprepared. There was no advanced salting, no preemptive parking restrictions, and no coordinated citywide response. Plow blades had not even been attached to the few trucks that were available for service. 20 inches of gale-driven snow sculpted 6-foot drifts in the street. The incredulously named Department of Public Works was notably absent. City employees frantically thumbed the yellow pages to hire private plows. Individual councilmen telephoned contractor friends to remove snow only in their own wards to placate their constituents. Plow trucks were stuck behind buried cars. It was a fiasco. It was later revealed that fraud had been as widespread as incompetence. One contractor, the father of the acting city manager at the time, was credited with frugality, having billed City Hall only $530 for several 24-hour days of work. But the dates on the invoices raised eyebrows. There was no February 29th that year, and, much to the amusement of the grand jury that subsequently investigated the city, there had never been a February 30th. This holiday on vice had cost taxpayers an estimated $650,000. Bills had been paid by unauthorized city officials with no records of work done weeks after the storm had passed. Invoices were poorly recorded or missing entirely. 6 Yonkers contractors were indicted for overcharging the city. The findings would have been laughable had they not been so appalling. In March 1971, the State Investigation Committee released its report, a scathing indictment of the local corruption that had preceded DelBello's mayoral ascension. During DelBello's brief time in office, he had wrested control of garbage collection and disposal. The tipping point came when the private carters jacked up collection fees by 15%, leaving local merchants in the lurch. The mob had overplayed its hand. DelBello swept in emergency legislation allowing hardship collections and pressed the city council to authorize city-run commercial pickups at much lower rates. The city once again had full access to its own incinerator. It had begun outcompeting the carting barons for commercial trash pickups and forcing them to pay market rate disposal fees at the city facility. It was one of many feathers in DelBello's cap. Less than 2 years into his first term as mayor, DelBello had crippled graft, fixed flawed emergency response systems, filled top agency seats with nationally recognized professionals, and turned around the city's finances. The budget was in the black, a triumphant political punctuation ending a decade of deficits. DelBello later went on to become the county executive, the visionary county executive of Westchester, but I want to read a passage which goes all the way back to his days before politics, 1952, in that it highlights why he was such a strong leader in the area of racial equality and fairness in government. After 8 weeks of basic training, he was assigned to Fort Gordon, Georgia, a patchwork grid of military obeisance parked in the steaming southern reaches of Red Pine and Tupelo, several miles from where the Savannah River carves a languorous, undulating border with South Carolina. The fort, named for Confederate Major General John Brown Gordon, who later in life became Georgia's governor, was the training base of General George S. Patton's Third Army. Nearly abandoned after World War II, the base quickly regained its military eminence as the training ground for the U.S. Army Signal Corps. Fort Gordon itself was insular and functional, its heterogeneous culture not a far cry from New York's melting pot sensibilities. In his Yonkers youth, DelBello had infrequently witnessed open racial discrimination, though, as with all parts of America, it was layered in the racial geology of the time. Discrimination up north was more territorial and more covert and hierarchical. Groups coalesced around neighborhoods and exerted pressure on one another through political allegiances. Discrimination varied by location with competing strata for everyone to occupy. Georgia's venomous hospitality was an eye-opener. Reconstruction had institutionalized slavery's less visible offenses, placing Black citizens squarely in the crosshairs and sometimes nooses of a hateful white superstructure. Bigotry was endemic, lynching was frequent, and segregation was a fact of life so utterly ingrained in the Southern worldview that its repugnance failed to generate even a political afterthought among most white citizens. The atmosphere of egalitarian in DelBello's military environs evaporated off the base. It shocked him when a group of his closest friends, including a young Black man from Westchester County, were turned away at a movie box office because they refused to divide themselves into the theater's separate seating sections for Blacks and whites. The experience molded him. For the first time in his own life, he understood how a bigoted government could betray its own constitutional principles and fail the very people it served. Racism wasn't history. It was the most despicable moral failure of his day. And after 9 successful years as county executive, I wish I had time to go into all of it, he was elected lieutenant governor of New York along with Mario Cuomo. But New York has a split ticket primary system, meaning that he was on the ticket with someone who was quite jealous of his accomplishments. Cuomo had wanted a different lieutenant governor and had made that clear to him. So when their shotgun marriage, as the news called it, won the governor's race, DelBello found himself shut out of Cuomo's circle, eventually leading him to resign his position several years later. December 1984. The Japanese businessmen were not pleased. Standing in a secure building in a terminal at LaGuardia International Airport in Queens, they waited 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and half an hour as bursts of bitter cold swirled across the runways under a thick pall of indifferent gray, portending the kind of early winter storm that periodically buried New York's urban archipelago with heavy snow. The undulating gusts churned the brine of Flushing Bay, infusing the sweet, heady kerosene vapors from idling jet engines with a dank, icy musk. The men were part of the Kaidan Ren, a post-war organization representing scores of Japanese companies, industrial organizations, and regional economic groups. In the early 1980s, the Kaidan Ren was riding a wave of Japanese economic dominance, crystallized in the number of Japanese imports that flooded the American markets at a time when the United States was still feeling the effects of a recession characterized by gas shortages, 14% plus interest rates, and almost 11% unemployment. The proliferation of modern electric-fired steel mills in East Asia had cratered coal-dependent Midwestern smelters, hobbling America's antiquated automobile industry in particular. Amid the economic downturn and runaway inflation of the 1970s, New York State had suffered greatly. Now, members of the Kaidan Ren, who had spent the morning touring New York City and the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, were primed to meet with the governor himself. He was scheduled to pick them up at LaGuardia on his way from Washington, D.C. meeting to Albany, the state capital. After the plane meeting, DelBello would lead the businessmen on a tour of the state legislature before a banquet at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute's museum. The problem was that no governor appeared on the runway apron. Amid the pitched whistling of turbine engines, DelBello's carefully anchored calm masked a growing apprehension. He called Mike Del Guidice, Cuomo's chief of staff and later advisor to Cuomo's son Andrew during his tenure as New York governor, only to learn that the governor had decided to fly directly to Albany, then have the plane turn around and pick them up. So this was a very insulting thing and sort of the final straw for Al DelBello. So he decided to tender his resignation. This is the last part. When DelBello returned to the state Senate on January 31st for his final legislative session, the packed audience of legislators greeted the Senate president with a standing ovation. Though a man of calm, understated emotion, DelBello was visibly moved when the session over which he was presiding turned into a 40-minute bipartisan tribute to his 25-month tenure. Senate Minority Leader Manfred Orenstein said to him, "You are an extraordinary public servant who has articulated a vision of governance with enormous clarity. You are probably one of the best managers I've ever seen in government." Republican Majority Leader Warren Anderson, the lieutenant governor in waiting, hinted that DelBello might have replaced Cuomo if he had not chosen to resign. "You had a great future in public service, not only in this chamber, but elsewhere," Anderson offered. "Somebody said you're taking your gavel with you. You're welcome to it. You deserve it. You deserve more than that." After a lengthy applause and handshakes, DelBello walked to the front door of the Senate office building. A steady snow swirled outside. He remembered an interview he had conducted recently in which he said why he was leaving his post in Albany. A new challenge, new opportunity, a new career. "Life's too short to do one thing," said the former lieutenant governor, county executive, mayor, and councilman. He breathed deep with resigned conviction and descended the marble steps of the Capitol building for the last time. Snowflakes clung to his black-rimmed glasses and dark overcoat. He strode toward the car as if walking into history, fading into sepia, a portrait of a leader among leaders, like the others honored in the city hall of his beloved Yonkers. That's it.
Thank you so much, John. I think there's this misconception out there that biographies tend to be like dry or uninteresting. And at least in my opinion, I think that reading really pushes us against that assumption. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Our final reader for today is Kristin Rohman Rehkamp. Kristin lives with her husband and 3 children in Lake Elmo, Minnesota. She currently owns and operates La Via Belle LLC, laviabelle.live, a brand that inspires giving and beautiful living. Given her personal experience with her oldest daughter, Kristin is passionate about serving communities, organizations, and individuals working to break down barriers, raise awareness, and make a difference in the lives of those braving mental illness. Kristin proudly serves in various St. Croix Valley, Minnesota community leadership roles and programs. As Kristin advocates for her daughter through writing and speaking engagements, she looks forward to evolving mental health and well-being thinking and care models for those that journey with her family. In Finding Us, Kristin shares her story to educate and bring visibility to what living with a child braving a mental illness looks like and feels like. Her hope is that her memoir normalizes the mental health conversation while providing others comfort and support in knowing their unique challenges and journeys are understood. So let's welcome Kristin.
Thanks, Hayla. Thank you everyone for listening and joining us. This is an honor to read with Charlie and John and share our story with you. And I want to thank my parents, Tom's parents, and my husband for joining this call, because from day one, they've been a rock on this journey. And mental health and mental illness doesn't impact one, it impacts many. And I just, again, want to thank my parents, Tom's parents, and mostly my husband for joining this call and being my rock. I'm going to start by reading a blurb from my author's note and from various excerpts in my book. The book is a memoir. It's various weekly writings that I wrote the first year that my husband and I braved a mental illness with our daughter. Living with a mental illness is a journey, rarely, if ever, a linear process that is messy, complicated, and often misunderstood. Readers may notice this in my writing and experience, however, despite our best efforts, we cannot control, but instead bravely learn to live with, learn from, and feasibly teach others around us along the way. First chapter. We were terrified we were going to lose her. Our daughter was waking up and going to sleep in a panic or state of fight or flight. She felt like she could not breathe. Her chest hurt, loss of sensation in her limbs, dizziness, disorientation, headaches, all rolling up to a state of terror I had never in my life witnessed. Our daughter thought she was dying, and if that was not bad enough, she preferred dying over the way she was feeling. Regardless if her symptoms were perceived, symptoms of anxiety and panic, or real, it was her reality. There was and is no comfort in knowing they were not, quote unquote, real, not for her and not for us. Hospitals' ERs are not always equipped to handle a mental health crisis, yet the only place for those with a mental health crisis to go. A result of the quote unquote system, certainly not a choice. I will forever be grateful for the compassionate team at the Children's Hospital that cared for our daughter. However, they did not specialize in children's mental illness. Their role was simply to prevent self-harm while we waited and waited. Our daughter kept shouting, "Why aren't they doing anything? Why is no one doing anything?" And she was right, absolutely right. No one was attempting a diagnosis or treatment. The team's primary and only role was to keep her safe by not allowing her to leave the hospital room or even use the bathroom alone. We waited and we prayed we would get her transferred to a mental health hospital before we needed to sedate or restrain her. And so you can understand and feel the weight of this unfathomable idea. Our daughter was an 80-pound, 11-year-old girl that still believed in fairies and holiday magic. On Monday, October 5th, 2020, we learned our daughter's case had been reviewed and approved for admission into a local inpatient mental health hospital. This after spending 7 days in the hospital. Like so many others, we waited in fear and prayed for a miracle. Still trying to grasp that just 2 weeks earlier, our daughter was living her life with no indication of a mental illness. Our oldest, who was transferred by ambulance, was accepted via patient intake alone. My husband and I walked through the front doors without our daughter. And after driving separately, per policy, not our choice. Emotionally and physically exhausted, we learned only one of us could see her at a time. Leaning on each other was not an option. I removed my electronics from my person, walked through a metal detector, and was escorted down a long hallway by security. Nothing about this experience felt comfortable. I was taken to room number 8, the last door on the right. The door was unlocked by staff, and I found our daughter alone, scared, and crying in new hospital garments I did not recognize. For safety reasons, the room was simple and sterile. A small bed with a blanket, wood desk and nightstand, hard floors and walls, a small bathroom with a breakaway door, and the windows were frosted. You could not see out, intended to protect patient privacy. Independently, my husband and I each had 5 minutes to say goodbye to our daughter, who desperately begged us not to leave her. With broken hearts, we left the hospital, not fully comprehending what just happened. Sense of control over the situation lost. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that prepares you for a moment like this. And yet I still remember the weight of knowing that because our daughter got a bed at the Children's Mental Health Hospital, another child still waited. Another chapter I'm going to read from. It doesn't get easier, but you get stronger. Yesterday and last Monday, our daughter had a pretty severe panic attack leaving a counseling session. Unfortunately, these panic attacks happened in the car, which was and still is both difficult and dangerous for both my daughter and me. You have to remember panic attacks are a state of irrational fear, and that body automatically goes into a state of fight or flight, most often uncontrollable. If an attack happens in the car, our daughter wants to flee the car or run away, a natural response to something that is causing you fear or pain. However, for a parent or care provider driving the car, pulling over or stopping is not always in the best interest of the driver or the car. We pulled over once out of concern for the safety of our other 2 children in the car, but quickly realized we just let a child in an irrational state of fear run from the car. How are we going to get her back in the car, and would she run into traffic or simply run away? Thankfully, in that situation, I had my husband to help me. Yesterday and last Monday, it was just me. I did not know then and still do not know today the right decision, but instinct tells me to get my daughter and myself to a safe place. So yesterday and last Monday, I drove with my arm held like a barrier between her and me for protection. Our daughter screamed. She hit the car. She hit me, bit me, yelled, and screamed out the window, "Somebody help me," and grabbed the steering wheel at 55 miles per hour a couple of times in an attempt to pull the car over. When stopped at a light and your daughter is pounding windows with her fists, hitting the dashboard with her feet, and screaming for help out the window, it is difficult not to feel judged and fear a potential intervention if the situation was misread. So with this context, please do not judge me for not pulling over. A parked car at the side of the highway in the middle of nowhere with a panicked child could result in an irreversible accident involving my child and others. I could never forgive myself. And please do not judge me or others for not knowing how to parent a mentally ill child. Each day there are new hurdles and uncertainty. I'm not sure it gets easier if one gets stronger. I have to believe and hold on to the faith that sooner or later I will be stronger and might even just get a little easier. Trust all other families supporting a child, young or older, braving a mental illness might say the same thing, and always assume good intent. Please lead with care and compassion, and do not be too quick to judge. The strength of love, importance of family, and never giving up. I reflect back to when our oldest daughter struggled most. There were times my husband and I had to ask our 9-year-old son to take his 5-year-old sister into her bedroom. He knew to grab a movie and headphones and to close the door to avoid the unwelcome sounds and sights of the panic attacks that plagued our oldest. I cannot begin to describe how that felt as a parent, recognizing the insanity of the ask and horrible reason for the ask. In addition, I remember tears from our littlest every time he took her sister to a medical appointment. Tears that stemmed from our eldest's second ER visit, resulting in that transfer to a local inpatient mental health hospital. Our littlest never got to say goodbye to her older sister and waited 17 days to see her again. Every time our oldest experienced a panic attack, it induced fear in our littlest around the possibility that her sister would be taken and not come home. I remember being in the throes of keeping our oldest safe while my heart broke for our other 2 children lost in the chaos of it all. Experiencing things, being asked to do things, seeing and hearing things you would never wish for any child. Which version do you see? In one aspect of our daughter's life, she is flourishing. The situation is new and those around her are new. She's learning, surrounded by friends, and seeking different opportunities to surprise her dad and me every day. Generally, she's energized and willing, wanting to be challenged. She advocates for children's mental health. She challenges all of us not to forget other children in the hospital via some philanthropic work she's involved in. Her awareness and compassion for others is off the charts. And this week, she starts media training to prepare for children's mental health advocacy work in the public sector. In another aspect of her daughter's life, she is struggling and her behavior is drastically different. In this space, she is reminded every day that she is different. Her life unfairly changed. We see more significant age regression, regressed executive function, and memory impairment or disassociation. She is lonely and her performance is declining. She is often in tears and angry at the situation, which sadly influences how she presents to and treats others. All of the above is not an excuse and something we are actively parenting, just the reality of the situation, loneliness inducing anxiety and frustration. My personality and nature are often too quick to judge or even just perceive what I think or want to see. I might more than I should see our daughter and others in the second light I describe above. Instead, I might need to examine myself. I'm working hard every day to change that, and generally I feel our world needs to do the same. We are also quick to assume less than positive or good intent. So I ask you, which version or circumstance do you see? And does that perception influence what you see and how you respond? I, for one, have a great deal of work to do. 3 more excerpts I want to read. Empower your story. The executive director of NAMI Minnesota said something in a recent media interview we participated in that has stuck with me. She said, the word stigma is being moved away from. It too easily rolls off the tongue. And I reflect back on all the times I've used the word simply because others did. She continues, what people are afraid of is feeling discriminated against. It is not about the person feeling shame for their condition or situation. It is our reaction to it that causes them to feel shame. She nailed it. We do not tell our story for recognition, accolades, for any other perceived gain. We do not even tell our story to reduce stigmas, per se. We tell our story to normalize the conversation, educate others, and reduce the shaming that occurs to ultimately alleviate the shame those with a mental illness, an illness they did not choose, feel as a result of our behavior, our perception, our misunderstanding, and our lack of education. Our daughter never felt shame for her mental illness until others indicated she should. We have always empowered our daughter to tell her story, to be a voice for others, but just as important, to feel strength and empowerment for her own mental health and well-being, to feel some level of control in a space of life that can feel uncontrollable and extremely unfair. Our reaction to her and others that might appear different has to change. She is not a hero or different. We are not heroes or different. We are simply trying to empower our family to be stronger than the shame that knocks at our door every day. And if our job as parents to empower and protect our children but benefits others, we are beyond grateful the additional value is gained. Fixing it is not our job. Our beautiful daughter is standing 6 inches from my face, screaming at me. In these moments, it is difficult to see the beauty I know exists. I struggle to break free from her irrational anger, hurtful words, and need to cling to my body. I beg our daughter to stop, but truth be told, I am not and will not beg. I instead work really hard to keep my cool, channel patience that wanes every week, and exercise the words tools I've been taught by more counselors than I care to count. If it appears I'm begging, it is simply because I'm exhausted by an illness that is and will remain relentless. Our uninvited guest certainly has no intention of packing its bags soon, regardless of how many times we have politely dropped a hint. Maybe it's time to not be so polite. The physical discomfort of the moment will pass. It always passes. It is the emotional damage I worry about. Our youngest daughter cries and pleads with me to do something, Mom. Mom, fix it, make it stop. Our son quietly retreats to his room and into his devices. How can I not feel like a failure? And darn it, I think I'm starting to feel resentment toward our oldest daughter in the situation we've been in for 18 months. And shoot, now I feel guilt for feeling resentment toward our child. A few days after peace and calm, I will analyze the situation, question my recollection and response, and wonder if there might be something wrong with me. It is an exhausting and vicious cycle. But instead of relenting, I will continue to stand my ground and teach our children through our own actions the importance and value of self-preservation, perseverance, and accountability. I will remind them that we do not lean on the excuse. We do not sit in it, and we certainly do not give up or give in expecting others to fix it. Yes, I continue to let our daughter, our children, our family lean into the disease or mental illness and excuse, or I can push us into it and pass the discomfort. It is only if my husband and I model it will our children learn, value, and trust their own strength and perseverance. Sadly, as much as all parents might want to, or wish we could, fixing it is not our job, but always and forever, teaching is and will be. The last part I want to read is just a couple pieces from the closing author note. I reflect a bit on where we've been, where we are now, and where we are headed. And truth be told, the only question I can answer as described in this book is where we've been. Mental illness is rarely rational or predictable. You cannot rationalize something that is irrational, nor can I advise how our daughter's illness might present this afternoon, tomorrow, or even a year from now. Nearly 2 years later from the initial onset, our daughter continues to brave a severe panic disorder. This does not make us experts or heroes. It simply means we understand. But despite all the challenges, trust we are all strong and empowered to make a difference. We are empowered to make a difference and influence change for our child, for our family, for us. Similarly, empower your child to be proud, strong, and compassionate. Leave shame at the door. It does not have a place here, never has, never will. Find comfort and strength in knowing you are not alone and neither is your loved one. We are standing beside you, even though you may not know us or see us. Life always goes on, and collectively, so must we. Together, we will be the force of change that is so desperately needed for all that brave a mental illness. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. You paint such, harrowing, but also hopeful at various times picture of this health system and even just of your own sin. And I think that's a testament not just to your writing ability, first of all, but also to the urgency of your work. So really, thank you for sharing with us. Thank you to all of our authors. Again, I just want to say you guys have really opened up a lot here. And I think that takes a lot of bravery and commitment. So with that being said, we do have a little bit over 10 minutes for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat, and then I will make sure it gets asked. We do already have a couple of questions to start with. So first of all, a question for John. This is the first biography that I think that we've featured in an Atmosphere author event. And we have a question that I'm particularly interested in considering that, which is, can you share with us the process of research that went into writing the book?
Certainly. I was very fortunate in that Al's wife, DelBello, has essentially a library of all of the things that he did in his life, articles from the New York Times, Daily Item, Westchester newspapers and magazines. And there was a previous author who had begun the project, just doing it in a very historical retrospective. He unfortunately passed away a number of years ago before completing the work, or even sort of getting to the point of having a near finished work. But he did leave a wonderful record of not only notes, but of interviews with Al DelBello before the end of Al's life. So I basically poured through everything. It was not a short task. It was like writing a thesis 5 times over, I suppose. But it was extremely gratifying. And fortunately, I had all that information. But other than that, it was just going through all of the material in his life. I was guided by DelBello, and in terms of the kinds of things she wanted to focus on. And I knew something about Al because my mother worked for Al DelBello for many years. So I had the benefit of having known about him. I even worked on his campaign once many years ago when I was a child. So with all of that, I think it made the research process not only a little bit easier, but kind of joyful as well.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's always a good thing to hear with writing, right? That there's at least some joy involved.
Right. Other than that, it was just the biggest, giantest footnoting effort, of reading through things, seeing quotes, seeing things that crystallized the issues where we had come up with an outline. And then, building a story around it. And I was given a very clear instruction, which was good for me because of the nature of the work, the writing I had already done, writing a lot of op-eds, which was make it fast, make it powerful. We don't want to spend a lot of time on details, but really tell a story.
Totally. Yes. A question now from Joni to Charlie. We'd like to hear more about your other publications. You've written a few memoirs prior to this one, so if you could tell us a little bit about those and maybe what led you then to writing this one in particular.
Sure. My very first one is called Prague, My Long Journey Home. And it's primarily the story of my life during World War II as one of the so-called hidden children. Although I was raised a Catholic and I was a devout little Catholic boy, I had turned out that I had 3 Jewish grandparents. And because of that, by the German law, Nuremberg laws, the Nazis defined me as a Jew. So because of that, I was on the list to be transported to a camp. And because of that, I was hidden for the last couple of years of the war, hidden on a farm. So mostly that book is about that, and just a little about coming to America. But primarily it's about my life during World War II. The second book is titled Ready, Fire, Aim, An Immigrant's Tales of Entrepreneurial Terror. And anybody who's been an entrepreneur knows what I mean when I say entrepreneurial terror. When the first Friday comes around and you can't meet the payroll, that's the first time you experience entrepreneurial terror, and many more times after that. But it's a story of my life in the U.S. and starting companies, running companies, as running the Entrepreneurship Center at the University of Maryland, and also being in the venture capital business and investing in high-tech companies. And then the third book, of course, is Cowboy from Prague. And even though it was never intended that way, these 3 books form sort of a trilogy. When I gave a presentation the other day, someone called it the Immigrant Trilogy. So I think maybe I'll pick up on that. You said the fourth book is a kind of a fun little book called Name Droppings: Close Encounters with the Famous and Near Famous. They're all short vignettes about various famous people I've met, from Bill Clinton to Clint Eastwood, Dr. Ruth, Larry Doby, just goes on. There are 14 of them. So those are the books. Plus, my Prague book was also translated into Czech, and it's called Dlouhá cesta domů, which means Long Journey Home. And it was actually published before any of the English language books were published in Prague by Mladá Fronta, which is the largest book publisher in the Czech Republic.
All right, lots of Heller literature that we all need to pick up on for sure. A question for Kristin. How involved was your daughter in the writing process of the book, if at all?
Yes. So Anna was certainly very involved. There was actually the book. Let me step back. When I wrote the journal entries, I never intended that there would be a book. So the book is truly really raw and poignant, meaning it wasn't edited a great deal. And Anna knew that I was both writing those journal entries and that we might be writing a book. There was actually about a year ago, we had an opportunity to tell our story more publicly. And it was actually that situation that we were told that she couldn't go public with her story. And it wasn't her choice or our choice. It was somebody else telling us this. And for the first time ever, my husband and I, had to tell our daughter she was being advised she couldn't do, or I should step back. She was being advised she couldn't do something. And she asked us, "Are you ashamed of me? Are they ashamed of me? Should I be ashamed of myself? Will I be in the future?" And this is not something that my husband and I could answer. And honestly, it was that moment that we as parents had a choice. We could either hide her and protect her, or we could empower her and give her a voice. And that's what we chose to do, and she was a part of the journey. There is a chapter in the book actually that she wrote or was a part of writing. So she is very much aware of the book. She is often in our store in Lake Elmo, sharing her story and interacting with customers all the time. And we have some other author readings coming up here this spring that she'll be a part of. So she's certainly very much a part of it and has contributed as well.
Yes, I think that's so lovely to hear, because it's giving a voice to the people within your memoir besides just you. And I think that's a really wonderful thing to see in that text. So we have a question now from Linda to Charlie. How has writing your story changed you?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure it's changed me. What it has changed is my ability to talk about some of the things that happened to me in my earlier life. I think, like a lot of people who survived a war and traumatic experiences, I really didn't want to talk about it. Plus, being an immigrant in the U.S., my father gave me an order to become what he called 100% American, and I didn't want to call attention to myself as an immigrant. I wanted people to think that that I was born here and spoke without an accent and so forth. So once I started in the first book, and actually the only reason I started on that first book was that my mother was in her last few years of her life. She was in an independent living facility here near us here near Annapolis. And the ladies there who knew her, they recognized that she's a little different because of her accent and because she was quite a formal European type elegant lady. And they asked her to speak to the group about the story of her life. Well, my mother called me and she said, "I can't do this. You have to do it for me." So I spent several days with my mother filling in a lot of things that I never even knew about my own life and about my parents' life and about my family and so forth. And I gave the talk on my mother's behalf, and that actually got me started and started talk about all the things that had happened to us and started writing about them. So in that way, yes, my life has changed.
Yeah, and I thought that was such an interesting question because maybe people don't necessarily think like once someone's experiences are recorded in like a memoir, an autobiography, that's it, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So I think that's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. We have a question from Cindy to Kristin. Your decision to, this isn't a question, actually, just a statement. Your decision to include your daughter in telling her story sounds wonderfully empowering, but I wanted to highlight that real quick. And then I just have one last question for both Kristin and John, actually. Kind of inspired by the question that Charlie just answered. Have you learned anything from the process of writing your book that you were perhaps surprised to learn or that affected your own life, especially, coming from the fact that you're writing nonfiction? Maybe it's a little different than someone who's writing a novel or a short story or something like that. Maybe
Kristin,
John, if you want to start us off.
Whichever. Okay. I think more than anything else, for me, I should say that almost all the writing I've done is nonfiction in a way because I write a political opinion and editorials and so on. Probably the most, I think, powerful lesson that I learned was what you don't know about people and things. I mean, I think when I started the project, it was more like, okay, it's like a research paper and like a really big giant one. And I'm going to try to get all the facts and put them in there and make it exciting. What I really found was how much emotional gravitas there was among the people that I spoke to, how important the life of this individual, DelBello, was to so many other people that were involved in the project and giving me information. And really, I think the most, again, probably nothing that was sort of life-changing for me, but the one thing that I said to myself over and over again was, why didn't I ask more questions like this when my mother was alive and I could have gotten some of that information? Why didn't I know it myself? How could I not even know about things in Westchester that were really great things that, you know, I never got involved in or never even knew about? Part of it, I think, is being a child growing up in a place. It's your hometown, it's your area, and you just kind of want to get out of there and go on with your life. Having read it, I realized how much I truly love Westchester and how much I love New York and how important it is to me. You know, I wish I could go back and talk to all the people, some of whom have passed away, including Al. But in a way, it's like, I feel like everybody who's still there wants to tell me everything. And everybody who's passed away is sort of standing behind me, standing over my shoulder, kind of coaching me on. I hope there'll be more. I feel like I want to write more about Westchester County someday.
So the story is that in college, I chose to be an interior designer because I never wanted to write papers in college. So writing or being an author was never on my bucket list. So I think the things that I've learned about writing is how much I really actually enjoy it and enjoy the process of, and I realize this is an Atmosphere Press author reading, but I honestly cannot say enough great things about the team. And I think I needed this. I needed this in my healing process. I needed this for my daughter and I. And I was surrounded by a great team and friends that were helping me write a book, but were serving so many other purposes for my daughter and I. So it was really enjoyable. I can't say if I'll ever write another book, but I would not check it off the list because I thoroughly enjoyed it and would recommend the experience to anyone who might be considering it.
Well, thank you, Kristin. It means a lot to hear you say so. And I promise everyone I did not pay Kristin to say that. But yeah, I guys, this has just been so illuminating. And I mean, nonfiction is definitely, I'm very partial to nonfiction, I will say. But even notwithstanding, it was so wonderful to hear all three of you read today and share, you know, these thoughts and perspectives and ideas. So thank you again. I know I keep saying it, but really thank you to Charlie, John, and Kristin for just being generous with your time and your words today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for being here with us to celebrate these intelligent, thoughtful, creative writers. Don't forget that you can order Cowboy from Prague, Alfred B. DelBello, His Life and Times, and Finding Us from the links in the chat. And also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse new and forthcoming releases. You can sign up for our email newsletter and find out about more events like this one, or to submit a book manuscript of your own. Feel free to submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com, and you can always let us know that you attended today's event. But other than that, we'll look forward to hearing from you, and that's it. Have a happy new year, everybody.
Thank you, Hala.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie and Kristin, too.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful books.
Bye.
Bye-bye.